Welcome back to another YouTube Tuesday. My name is Derek, and today we're going to be going over a video that iPad Rehab has put out just recently, titled Samsung Note 20 Data Recovery, Find Main Power to Troubleshoot Logic Board. Let's get into the video. Now, for those of you that don't know, Jessa Jones has been doing repairs for quite some time now. She's been uploading videos for about a decade now, so if you aren't subscribed, I highly recommend it. I only watched the first minute of this video before deciding, you know what, this might be a good video to review. So let's get started.
Hi everybody, let me show you what just got here in the mail, and I think it might make an interesting case that you might face one day. We've got a Note 20 and it showed up here as just the logic board, and the claim on the paperwork says that the logic board is missing some connectors, so they want me to put connectors on so that we can get the data out of this Note 20. But my question is, well, if I put connectors on there, how do I know that the board itself is going to be able to turn on? Because I'd hate to put the connectors on only to find out that I'm going to end up having to take the data chips off of the board to put it on my working board. So that's where I'm stuck right now, because I do have a working Note 20. This is what I'm going to use as a source of the connectors, but it's also what I would use as a receiver for the chips. This could go one of two ways. Am I putting the good connectors on the bad board, or am I putting the chips from the bad board on the good board? So we have to figure out, does this board turn on?
All right, so that's very interesting sometimes you're in a pinch where you may just end up salvaging a connector from a donor board, but to have a completely working motherboard that you might end up needing to use anyway. Maybe you are on a time crunch and you can't source the connector, but connectors are relatively easy to source. So let's see where she goes from here.
That's pretty definitely damaged. All right, we've got one missing connector, and we're going to need that in order to actually be able to see the screen.
So the video kind of jumped right there, but it looks like, just looking at it, we've got a few missing components. The connector's more than half gone. So yeah, let's see. The connector and at least two little guys were knocked off, maybe more, and it looks like the connector here on the very right is also damaged. Yeah, you must have been really, I've never seen a connector get damaged this bad. It must have, I would almost say, be intentional. Like, how else could it be damaged that much?
Definitely damaged. All right, we've got one missing connector, and we're going to need that in order to actually be able to see the screen. This one as well. And over here, that one we might be able to save. I'm not sure. But it looks like we've got three connectors that do have damage. Now, what I'm worried about, rather than just replace the connectors, is when I look at the board, I can also see sort of this damage to the middle part. So I'm not 100% confident that the only thing wrong here are these connectors. And that's why I want to find out that's why I want to just sort of be able to prove, yeah, this board can turn on before we do the connector work. All right, so the first thing I want to do is figure out what information do we have for a Samsung Note 20. As you guys know, the Samsungs have a lot less information than the iPhone. So let's look on the board to find the exact board number.
Most of the software, the schematic software like ZXW or JC Drawing, will have some of the versions of the models, but even then, there's typically no schematics. And even then, with the board view, there really is only the pads and not the components on them. So you don't know whether or not it's a filter or a resistor or a capacitor, a coil. You have to kind of infer that and also visually, see that or maybe test it with your multimeter. But yeah, there's not typically a whole lot of information on the Samsungs, which is unfortunate. But
if I skip this step, I have lived to regret it. All right, so here we are. Now this is always going to be printed somewhere on the board. So this says SM N986U, and then we've got all of these other ones. All right, so this is SMN986U. That's what we're looking for. So let's head over to ZXW and cross our fingers and hope. Note 20, N986U, that's our guy. All right, so let's orient ourselves so that we're looking at the board the same way. So let's move the board around to match ZXW. All right, so I can look at, this is going to be a match with the sim tray here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and identify where is the power management chip, because the main power rail is going to go from the battery. It might go to a chip that creates the main power rail from the battery, but ultimately the main power rail is going to go to the power management chip. So let's see if we can find that just by looking around the board. All right, as I look at the board, this big guy is definitely the CPU. This is definitely the memory storage IC. Let's flip the board. Now we're looking at the inner layer. And when we look at a chip that looks like this, surrounded by coils, I betcha that is the PMU. I bet this is a PMU. I bet that's a PMU. Any one of these might be a power management chip. Now, once we find one that we think is likely a PMU, like this guy over here, the next thing I'm going to do is click around the local capacitors to try to identify the main power rail.
So because of the lack of information, you can see on the screen, it's just a bunch of yellow and grays. And blues. Blues are no stuff, grays are ground, and yellows are some sort of data line. But the information isn't there. I mean, it gives you a drawing which shows you, okay, this looks like a coil, it's going to be a coil. This looks like a cap because it's got one side on ground, one side on data. Who knows? Some of these that are just yellow on both sides could be resistor, filter, they could even be a cap, capacitor. Some of these might be diodes, but there's just not a whole lot of information. But with experience, you'll know, okay, if there's a bunch of coils surrounding a component like this, it's definitely some source of PMIC.
Click one at random, click, and then we'll ask, is that the main power rail? So we're going to drill out and we're going to kind of look broadly and say, yeah, for sure, that's the main power rail, because we can see, yes, it's going to all of those three chips that we said those look like they're power management chips. And then it goes to multiple other areas of the board. Now here's another thing. The CPU requires ultra low power, so you'll never see the main power rail going directly to the CPU. It would electrocute it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the CPU and make sure that this power rail doesn't go there, which is going to be more evidence that it's main. All right, so let's flip the board and look back and say CPU. All right, does what's highlighted in red go to the CPU? No. Excellent. So now we're pretty confident this is our main power rail. So now we need to identify a spot on the main power rail where we can solder a wire. So what we're looking at right here is somewhere under there. Is there like a more open or obvious spot that we could find to solder the wire? Let's look for one that's up here on the top, because after we solder the wire, we're then going to have to ask the board to boot up. So I like it when my wires are on the top side. So let's see, is there any place on the top of the board? So let's flip this over and say up here on the top of the board, this is only the layer. I'm looking for this piece of the board. So let's go back to our information and see, do we have a board view that is both the top and the bottom board? Let's look around. Well, let's see. Not you. Let's click minus that. Let's do that one. All. Yeah, so now we can see what we were looking at before. And now we can see the other little top board. Okay, so those are our two connectors that we plug the screen into. So right there. And we can see that this is a piece of the logic board that's soldered to.
There's basically a sandwich board here going on, that's why. And the schematics will show you, the board view will show you different layers. So it took her a minute to find it. But a lot of these components are kind of covered up by shield or in between that sandwich layer. So you have to find something that's exposed. Otherwise you're going to have to basically remove shields and split boards to connect to the main power rail. So there should be one accessible, a test point at least, that you can tie into and connect a wire to.
The larger bottom board. All right, so we're looking at, is there something up here? Something maybe near to the connectors where we plug in the screen, because that's going to be very accessible. So let's look. So now we're gonna flip this around and say, okay, where's my main power rail? Oh, I have to go back to the beginning. Main power rail, main power rail. Here's my PMU. Click a local guy. Is that main? Yes, it goes everywhere, but not to the CPU. That's my guy. Okay, now we can look on this part. All right, here's a spot right here. So where is this kind of like standalone looking guy? Let's see if we can find it under the microscope. So there's going to be a soldered on shield right around there, and there's going to be a long connector, and then there should be like a standalone guy. So let's just go look under the microscope and see, can we find that guy? We've got putting our two connectors up here, and then we've got our big soldered on shield and this guy right here. So we could put a wire right here. Now it's a little bit difficult to get a wire on just the little nub of solder that's left. So I'm going to push away just very gently a little bit of this green paint and expose a little touch of the trace so that we can actually put a wire there. So this should be the main power rail. Now if we wanted to, we could get our multimeter out and see what the diode mode is there. We would be able to detect a short circuit just by doing this. All right, are we ready to solder a wire? Let's do it. Let's get a little bit of flux on there and let's tin that spot. So I'm gonna make my puffy pillow. All right, so I've got a nice juicy spot there for my wire, and I'll go ahead and put a ground wire. I don't have to solder a ground wire. I could just clamp the alligator clamp to ground, but it's easy enough to just solder a little wire right on top of this guy. Now this board has already been to a couple of shops, maybe a prior data recovery place. So that's why I just really want to make sure that this board can turn on before we start doing connectors. Because we don't know when the connectors got damaged. It could have been somewhere along the way. Or maybe that's what was wrong from the beginning. We don't know. All right, let me get my actual little wires. Make sure that's on there really nice and not touching anything else. And then I'll put a big fat ground wire on. Now you do have to worry when you're soldering these wires and then you're going to clamp to them and do stuff that you want them to have some flexibility. Don't use one that's like really, really rigid, or else if you just kind of like tip it, or if there's any pressure on that wire from connecting your alligator clamps, it'll just rip off the board, the trace, the thing that you've soldered to along with that wire. So pick a flexible wire. All right. Now we are ready to connect our wires to DC power, but then we have to figure out how do we actually turn this thing on, because in the Samsungs, they don't just automatically turn on if we just connect the charger. We have to actually find the power button spot on the logic board and then press it with tweezers or a power.
So as you can see, she's connected a wire to the data line and to the ground plane to basically brute force it. Now, one quick way to determine where you need to determine what you need to touch in order to activate the power button is to simply go to the power button on the frame of the phone, take a multimeter, for example, and touch the pads together. Typically, the connectors are typically the contact point for the power button on Samsungs is just pads that make contact with some spring-loaded pins. And if you can isolate which components make continuity when you click down when you can isolate which pads make continuity when you click the button, you can determine which prongs or pins on the motherboard you need to press if it's not a simple connector.
Power button. So what does that look like? All right, so now we're trying to say, how does the power button itself work? And we can see the power button goes to this set of 5 dots. So let's look at these set of 5 dots under the microscope. All right, there's my clicky clicky power button, and it's going to this set of 5 dots. And I can see this one right here. I can read the board, and I can see this is ground. So the actual clicking of the power button must be connecting 1, 2, 3, 4, one of those guys to ground. So let's see where that actually matches on the logic board. So here's the logic board, and it kind of snaps in there. So we will tip it over, and so now we can see these guys must be, this is ground, and connecting maybe all 4 of them to ground or just one of them, that would be how we would trigger the power button press. So we could connect our wires and then start pressing on these to try to simulate the power button. But to be honest, I think what will be easier is if we take our board with the wires and if we just lay it in here and just actually use the button. That will be the easiest way for this case, which is why I really like it when we can put our wires on the top of the board so that we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this in here. Now, obviously, the connectors here aren't going to connect because they're all damaged. So the only reason I'm putting it in here is just to be able to use the power button. Now I'm ready to connect to DC power. So let's pull up our DC power. All right, I'm going to connect positive, alligator clamp, and ground alligator clamp. And I'm going to press the power button, and then we're going to watch that DC power.
If there was a short on the main power rail, as soon as you connect it up to the power supply and there's this power running to it like there is now, even without compressing or pushing a power button, it would automatically draw current. So the fact that it isn't drawing current is a good sign, at least, that there's not a short on the main power rail.
There it goes. All right, that looks good so far. I'm going to let go of the power button. And that looks like normal booting.
One way to easily harvest components is to basically encapsulate them in flux. Flux, not only is flux good for soldering, but I found that it actually acts as a shield with sensitive plastics. Now these connector plastics do have a higher melting point than most plastics, but that still doesn't prevent them from melting. So if you encapsulate them in flux that you can just clean off later, as long as you're controlling your temperature and your airflow and things like that to not really just burn through the flux and melt them, it'll actually protect them a bit.
Okay, there's 1, 2. Now we might have to come back and get this 3rd one, but let's save that for later. And let's not forget that we need to get these. Okay, so I'm not sure about this connector that we didn't change, this guy over here, but we've got 2 connectors on, we believe, and see if it looks like it turns on. If not, we'll have to go back and do that 3rd connector. Okay, and now for the moment of truth. It looks like it can charge, and let's go ahead and press the power button. Can it turn on? I want to see that image. That is not what we hoped. Not what we hoped. All right, we'll have to go back and do that 3rd connector. Let me try if I can monkey with it a little bit. Oh yeah, that's this connector. I'm gonna just try and put my finger on it, pressure. I'm gonna hold it right here.
If it was showing the battery charging symbol, there's a good chance with enough pressure you're going to get an image, so it's probably going to work.
That's not a great connector. All right, we'll have to go back and do... Woo! It's working! Yay! Touch! Woo-hoo! Password. And if I let go of that connector, yay! All right, I do feel bad. I don't like that connection. I'm going to go ahead and go back and replace the janky connector. It's just I can push my finger on it, it does work, but there's no reason why this board can't be a working phone again. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace that connector, but to be cautious when it's somebody's data on the line, first, I'm gonna go ahead and plug in USB and make a full, complete smart switch backup. Just in case something goes wrong when I do that connector, we will have a path to data. So I hope you like that one. I like doing that one because I love how if you go step by step and you are cautious every step of the way, it definitely made sense to proof that board with a wire before doing a giant connector job that could have caused all sorts of additional problems. Nice and firm. Perfect. Love to hear the little clicky click. And can you turn on? Yes, there we go. Perfect.
All right, in my opinion, that was definitely worth the watch. Now, looking at the website, it looks like the damaged components are available. Look, you've got the charging port board, PC, let's see, 2 bigger connectors, maybe not all of them, but at least the LCD and the charging port, the 2 that were damaged, the one that she didn't almost replace, and then the one that she definitely did, along with the 3 connectors she needed to replace are there, and they're like 60 cents a piece. So at least she'll be able to get the other phone new connectors when she orders them, from wherever she does, and get that other phone up and running again. But definitely goes to show, and it's harder than it looks to salvage connectors. So you can tell when somebody knows what they're doing with solder work when they can actually salvage a connector. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And if there's a video that you'd like for me to review, leave it and link it in the comments below. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll see you in the next video.